welcome Superintendent Ida Wellner from this part.
I need a mic. I don't need two. Yeah, okay. Good morning. My name is Aida Buelna. I'm the superintendent of Esparta Unified School District, which is a small rural community. We encompass over 500 square miles, yet in our county, we are the smallest district. We have 980 students approximately. When the growing season comes into be, that's when our migrant camp opens up, and our student population does increase for a period of about 5 months, from April to November, October. This is my 35th year in education, my 7th as a superintendent of the same district. We have a 70% free and reduced lunch enrollment population, and 50 to 60% of EL students. I want to reiterate with the committee that we took seriously the LCFF and the LCAP and the request that we include our community. This wasn't something new to Esparta Unified. We have had long-standing communication with our ELAC, our DLAC, our PTA, our school site councils, and our booster clubs. We have an Ag Boosters Club. We have an FFA Boosters Club. We have Athletic Boosters Club. Because in small communities, we don't have all the resources that many of the large districts do have. And so I just want to share with you, we began in September when we received, well, really in July when it came into place, and really deciding how are we going to take the LCFF, the local control funding formula, because at that time we didn't have the calculators that told us how we were supposed to input these budgets, these numbers into what previously existed. So we began an LCAP committee in October and began looking at our demographics, at our data, at the 8 priority areas that were identified. We did it before the template was complete. We spoke to the board, we spoke to staff, wrote news articles for our community paper, which is called the Cape Valley News, or the Valley Voice. When January came around and the template was approved, we provided that. On our website, the articles that are printed in the Valley Voice are on the website. We brought forth and received input from our ELAC, our DLAC, our school site councils, sharing with them the student data and what they wanted to see us continue in the sense that these were the areas that we were doing well in, that our kids were being successful in, and asking where should we improve, what areas do we need to improve, and we drove it by our data, our student data systems. At the same time that all this is going on, we also looked at the Common Core state standards. We've been looking at them since 3 years ago when they became adopted. However, our assessment system wasn't aligned to the Common Core state standards. So when Smarter Balance assessment came into place, we began tying both Smarter Balance and the Common Core and discussing that with our LCAP committee, because that's going to be the data that we're going to be reviewing when we look at student assessment. We are a small, necessary high school. We have less than 300 students on our campus. So when LCFF was first adopted, we were told the small and necessary schools would be a part of that. It took a while for that to take place. It was cleanup legislation that had to happen. So we weren't sure what our numbers were going to be under LCFF. Once that happened, and we were thankful that it did take place and there was a change in definition, and we still met the definition, we had numbers that we can present to our school board in December. The other area that we want to ensure that you're aware that we do look to our community. We do look to our staff. The committee is comprised of staff members. It's both certificate, classified, and because we wanted to ensure that it wasn't something seen as from the top down, I am not part of the committee. And we have very few staff members that are on the committee. It's mostly comprised of the parents and the teachers and classified, and we talked to both unions, and it was very clear, and we tried to make it very clear to them that the additional dollars that were coming, both the concentration and the supplemental, is geared for kids. It's not going to be part of a package that comes and we negotiate it in contract. We are earmarking all those dollars proportionally to the students that represent the monies coming into the district. So want to make sure that all of these things that we have are in place. But as been shared, we are still deficit spending because we're not at the same level that we were in 07, 08. So we have made tremendous cuts in the last 4 to 5 years. And so we're bringing forward that information also to our community, because as a small community, and I understand when the stands aren't full at football games, as you know, that's a common denominator in high schools, we had to take away transportation for athletic events. And we're hearing we want it back. So as we hear these things, we want to make sure that the LCFF, which is tied very closely to the LCAP, we have to show our entire budget on the LCFF and then tie it to the LCAP. So we will be showing our compensations, we'll be showing the different programs that we have and tying them. Not necessarily everything ties into the 8 priority areas, but we have to demonstrate how we're spending the budget. And so that's one of the areas that may not necessarily tie, and I would recommend that be changed in the regulations, that everything be tied together. But that's something that we'll be looking at very closely.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have the Superintendent of the Shasta County Office of Education, Tom Armendino.
Thank you. And you even said my name correct, which is very unusual. So,
Got a name like Mercy.
yeah, you've got it down. That's right. Well, thank you for having me here. I really do appreciate you inviting us and listening to us today, and from some of the practitioners. I come from the Shasta County, and we're up in Redding area. Redding's where people know, but it's a very broad area. We're demographics. We have about 27,000 students, 25 school districts. As a county, I think we're 63% free and reduced. We have a small EL population. I think it's about 11%. Our homeless population is about 3%. So I'm the county superintendent. I've been in that position for 2 terms. I'm getting ready to run for my 3rd. And prior to that, I was a district superintendent, kindergarten through 8th grade in that same county, about 4,000 students. Been a school administrator for the last 21 years, and in my 29th year as an educator. And I wanted to share a little bit first about the LCFF and comment a little bit on what she was telling us. In regards to your concerns, we share the concern in regards to that the monies, that supplemental and concentration monies, are going to the students who are supposed to get them. And so we've worked with our local school districts to clarify exactly what those monies are for, and trying to ask them to set those monies aside, almost treat them as a categorical. So when they're at the bargaining table, because, I'll be honest with you, bargaining is difficult. Our folks have not had raises in many years, and unions are coming after all the monies, and they don't care where the monies are coming from, is to treat those outside. And we've actually even separated those on a spreadsheet to show them what those differences are, and have said to them, these are actually the monies that are available. These monies are really not available. Our districts have held to that. Our average increase is about 1.8% in our county as a whole. I think the largest increase they've seen is 4%, so it's very small. And that's a district that actually has increased enrollment, so that's where the majority of their monies are coming from. I myself gave a 1.4% raise this year to my folks, again, outside of where those other monies are coming from. We have done a lot of work in trying to help districts understand the LCAP. My team met in the fall, and we were concerned about waiting until the state board took action in January, February. So we met and made some decisions at that time to make sure that we were going to start meeting with our folks immediately. And what we recognized is, and we had our first meeting in November, we invited the superintendent, the CBO, and the instructional person from every district. Everybody showed up, and we invited them in, and we spent a day with them just kind of unpacking what is the LCAP, what are the 8 different areas, having some conversations, and really just kind of having them understand what that was all about. In truth, that first meeting, I think, in the minds of superintendents was about accountability and what do I need to do in order to make sure I can spend my money. I don't really believe it was focused on instruction and good practices at that time because we were all trying to understand what it was. We hadn't even received the template at that time. So we have 4 of those that are planned. We've had a second one now, and we had that after the template was adopted. And we really focused that meeting on best practices, and we looked at supplemental and concentration in particular. And we did some pretty neat things at that meeting. We brought in a group of foster youth students, and we did a little fishbowl activity where we put the students in the middle of the room, and we conducted a conversation with all of the folks in the room listening to that conversation, just with questions and various strategies, asking students exactly some things about what they were learning, what they weren't learning, what was working, what was not working, ideas that they had. We did the same thing in the afternoon with an alternative ed group of students at the county office. That's who we educate. We educate alternative ed students and special ed students, so we brought those students in too. And really what we were trying to do is provide some role modeling and some sampling of things that districts could do, as well as the folks sometimes struggle with that. Foster youth group in particular, they're all over the place in the district, and some of our districts are so small they only have 1 or 2 students, so we wanted to have them gather that feedback. So we spent some really good time on trying to make sure that they understood what some of those best practices were and how to work with students, how to increase learning. We looked at some research in regards to that too. We helped them define some sample goals. And really we, as a county office, we have to do an LCAP also. So we've tried to get ahead of this each time. So we created a timeline at the very beginning with our districts in November to say, at this point you should be here, at this point you should be here, at this point you should have already met with some of your stakeholder groups, and we've always tried to be about 2 to 3 weeks ahead of that so that we can provide them samples of what's worked for us, what hasn't worked each time we meet with them. We have a 3rd training coming up in 2 weeks. We'll meet with them as another group again in April. In addition, we brought in trainings for the school board. And so we just had one training, and we'll do another one in April for our school board so they understand what their role is in LCAP. We've created sample questions that they could do with the stakeholder group. We went actually out with a district, one of our larger high school districts, and we conducted their first meeting with stakeholder groups and helped them kind of facilitate that whole meeting and shared with them some questions that they could ask, how they can gather feedback. We've created a Dropbox on our website so where districts are sharing resources in our county. So one district maybe has a survey that they've used to survey information. Another district maybe has specific questions that they've asked. They're sharing those questions. So everybody is kind of using those resources to try to help each other as we do this work together. We also have a website where we have a lot of different materials that we're using to share with folks. In our county, we do job-alikes. We've been doing those for years. And so I have my staff at every job alike. So business folks are meeting monthly, the principals are meeting monthly, superintendents meet monthly, instructional folks meet monthly, and those meetings have all been focused on LCFF and LCAP this year. That's what the whole topic is every month. So we're sharing practices during that time, talking about what's working, what's not working. We are also bringing in a training with a group with the Association of California School Administrators, ACSA, and a group called Innovate Ed, which is kind of neat. What they're going to be doing is bringing leadership teams together to talk about, okay, you've gathered all this material, now you have your LCAP. How are you going to merge that with your district goals that you've had? How are you going to merge that with your strategic plan? Many districts have already had a plan and have some things that are working. How are you going to merge these things together? And then how are you going to monitor them and implement them in the coming year? So we're excited about that training that's coming in April. Other things we've gathered, I will give you some feedback that we've received at the county office as we've met with parents and families. And I will tell you in particular, our EL population has been our most difficult population to get feedback from. Our first 2 meetings, nobody showed up. We had a spaghetti feed. We had a few more people show up. We've actually even had folks sitting outside of Walmart with surveys right there and asking parents and giving them $5 gift cards before they would go in just to get their feedback. We've done home visits. We've done in their first language. We're calling up and doing surveys on the telephone. So we're really seeking hard to get their information. And the feedback that we're receiving is what they're telling us is that they're looking for more smaller group instruction, additional interventions, staff development for teachers is a big piece. We're having online learning with our alternative folks. We're moving towards a career pathway option and looking at some internships. They have a real interest for their students in particular who maybe aren't going to be going to college to look at career pathways. And so we're doing some work in that area, more Casey support. Transportation continues to be an issue in our rural area, and so they're looking at other ways we can help transport their children. Internet access is even an issue for some of our families. So we're even looking at trying to do a county-wide, we've been talking about this for a couple of years, approach to where every student and every family would have access to the internet at home through our office. Parent ed is another piece. Parents want to know what to do. They just don't always know what to do. So we're looking at putting a parent ed training together county-wide. We're actually calling it Academy, and that they would get, and even looking at, we have a college and career readiness initiative in our county. So we're even looking at that they would get an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree and a master's degree and PhD on how much parent ed that they would go through. So we're playing around with that idea. So we're doing a lot. I'm interested in your questions on accountability. And I will tell you, as a county superintendent, we already had the discussion about what those monies are for and what they're not for. But I will tell you, there's more accountability now with LCAP than we've ever had before. I've always had the authority as a county superintendent to certify a district's budget, and I know you're aware of AB 1200, and we've had to do that prior to where we're at now. Just 4 years ago, I had 3 negative districts in my county out of 9 in the whole state, and I had 13 who were qualified. Currently, we have none. So all 25 now are positive. And I've had to go in and not take over, but I've had to do stay and rescind twice until we've had to go in and we've had to kind of freeze their budget and work specifically and put a fiscal advisor in place. So I've always had that ability to kind of help with that spending piece, but the accountability piece in regards to how they were spending money and how it tied to instruction, I didn't have that authority. We now have that authority, and we now have some ability to say, okay, what are you going to do instructionally, and how are you going to use those monies, and how they're going to tie together. So I think there's actually much more accountability in what we're doing now than we've ever had before. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Ting.
First question is Mr. Stabler. Many of the expenditures you mentioned seemed fairly broad in terms of district-wide expenditures like class size reduction. I was trying to get a better idea of what expenditures were specifically targeted toward the 37% unduplicated population. And like when you mentioned your one-stop shop, I was unclear whether that was for the entire district or whether just only for this population.
Well, many of those, as I mentioned, are the entire population. We do have, in the LCFF, we do have the additional funding. So we're looking at using those funding across the district. I did mention in our conversations, our consultations, the idea of staff development, that again, that to maximize student achievement, but specifically for our targeted students, I mentioned the summer program that we don't have currently, and that would be a mandated type program that these students would have to attend so that they'd have an early chance at the core subjects. We're looking at that, but we see the student, as I mentioned, with the Student Center, part of the targeted funding is going to go for that because we're specifically addressing the free and reduced, we're addressing special needs. I mentioned the advantage with the foster students. So we're looking at possibly using some of those, the targeted funds for that.
Mm-hmm. And just out of curiosity, whenever you just need like a one-stop shop for everyone, how do you ensure participation by this population? Because they're generally the hardest to reach. They're the ones who generally least participate. So how do you make sure that benefit is actually getting?
Well, because they're not going to be able to enroll at the school site.
I see. Okay.
They'll be mandated to come to this student center that we're setting up across from the district office, and it'll be mandated. We're not the only one that does it. There are other districts that have it, and we've been looking at it, and it's a very good way to bring all these services, because you'll have kids coming in that might have special needs, and special needs are some of these other issues, and you don't know about it because it's they go to the regular school, and they don't really do the site doesn't have the time, or they don't do as intense as we're going to do it.
And regarding class size reduction, are you doing that district-wide, or are you going to focus on certain schools that have a higher population?
No. When I mentioned the class size, under the new legislation, we are able to move to 24, K-3, or negotiate with our employee association something different. And we just completed, I just completed a tentative agreement with our teachers association to go to 27-1 on K-5 in lieu of the going to 24-1 on the K-3.
Okay. Great. Thank you. My other question was for Dr. Miller. You mentioned becoming much more outcome-driven, which I think is ultimately our goal. Can you expound on how you would know, or how you're developing what those outcomes look like, or how would you be able to understand whether you've been able to achieve those outcomes? I think that's what we're trying to struggle with, is really trying to find the right ways to determine those outcomes.
So the way we're focusing our conversation with the groups is to turn some of that around. And that's new and that's different, and frankly, people struggle with that. In other words, we kind of know the old conversation and we know how to engage that. But the goal statement that we have up is that our students have to be able to perform and learn just as well as any students in Orange County, using that as an example. And there's obviously a huge disparity between most students in our district and students that surround us. And to some degree, there's some disbelief. People go like, well, wait a minute, that's not possible. Well, yes, it is possible, because, again, we have to go back and look at that lack of experience, lack of access. And then the metrics in the conversation we're trying to have with people is, what are the kinds of things that we would need to do to demonstrate that we've actually achieved that? So we're trying to frame the whole conversation in a very different way. It's not like, what would you like more of? It's really more of, if we're going to achieve this equity of outcomes, what does that look like? And what are the benchmarks along the way? Is that third grade literacy? Is that 8th grade algebra? Is that AP courses? What is that? And we're not limited to those things. Those are kind of customary things. And even going back to student engagement, there's some descriptors that are there from the state, but those are probably insufficient. We want people to go beyond that, and again, get back to, it may mean, and I'm making this up, it may mean that we have to go and have field trips where we haven't had field trips before, because, again, there's got to be a way to bridge that experience issue. Okay. There's got to be a way to bridge the access issue. Those are difficult challenges, and I don't think we're going to get it right the first year. In fact, we've said that just right up front, both in terms of process and product, but we're going to keep after it, and we're going to learn what best practice is. And again, that's why we're trying to partner with others to inform our work, because otherwise we're likely to just recreate the old system. And I think that's always the trap when you go to a new system, is we take the old one and kind of morph it around, say, well, that kind of looks somewhat like it. Right. And we're trying to avoid that, but I can't give you great specific answers.
Well, as you develop, I think we'd be very interested to hear, because I think we're all struggling with this, and I think that's the honest answer, because we're trying to not just rely only on test scores or only on old benchmarks that really didn't tell us, I think, what we needed to know. I think we're looking for new benchmarks that are trying to really tell us what we need to know.
Well, I think that gets back to the instructional side. If I can share from my previous district, the issue of proportionality was much more alive and well there. And as an example, because I ran the numbers, 2 elementary schools, one at 98% free and reduced, one at 25% free and reduced. You do the math calculations, $2.3 million difference when I stabilize everything else. So now what do you do with the $2.3 million? And in that, we also, in the last year, changed some instructional things with the 98%. Actually, they were outperforming the school that was up the hill, if you will, based on literacy rates, because we had shifted some of the instruction and the staff had bought into it and so forth. So part of it is we have to break the paradigm of belief, because there's oftentimes a belief that if you come from that part of town that somehow it's not going to work. Well, no, it actually does, because some of us actually came from that part of town to begin with. So, and we've done okay with all that.
Great, thank you. And just to Ms. Buolna, Mr. Armelino, so you both mentioned that you're getting this extra pot of money, and you're obviously under pressure to backfill many of the things that you cut, whether it's teacher salaries, you mentioned athletics. I guess that was one of I'll just say one of my concerns was just try to, how you balance that. Obviously, some of the money, some of the additional funding you're getting is not really directed at that, and how you're balancing that. And then I think you mentioned also internet access and sort of how you were looking at that issue and really bridging that. That's something that I'm very interested in, sort of this digital divide gap. So I'd be curious to hear how you're tackling that.
Well, I think one of the things that we've done, and I think it was shared by the county superintendent, is we looked at the monies as two separate pots. Here we have the LCFF that's based on your ADA, your grade level, your K, I think it's K3, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 12. That pot of money at the very top we quote called our general fund. That's what we get. The supplemental and concentration is outside of that. So we're not looking at touching any of those dollars for those items that we're being asked to look at as if they're not standing within the 8 priorities. Now, one of the things that it's interesting that the community members have bought into is, well, you need student engagement. That's one of the priorities. Kids will come to school if they can participate in sports, if they can be part of a drama program, if they can, all these other things. And I'm just saying, well, when we look at student engagement, we're talking about in the classroom. How do we engage students and ensure that they're active participants in their learning? And those are the things in educating and discussing with parents. This is what we're looking at, and we understand all the other issues. And yes, we had to make tremendous cuts in the past, and we'll be looking as a board and as a district to see how do we address both needs.
I'm trying to think specifically the question, but the way we approached it, we developed a spreadsheet, and we showed them each of their pots of money, their new monies, and we showed it very clearly. Here's your base funding, here's your supplemental, here's your concentration, here's your gap funding. Then we also looked at their enrollment, because that's another piece too. If you're in declining enrollment and you're losing money, our high school district's our largest district, and they've been declining. They've probably lost about 800 students over the last 4 years. And it's kind of caught up with them. K3, we went through that many years ago, too. So they have actually a negative funding, even with all those pots together. They're not getting really new monies because of their declining enrollment. It has to be, you have to look at that piece in there, too. So we've really kind of clearly put that in front of folks. In our county, we're fortunate that we're a small county. So we every superintendent's meeting, we go around the room and we say, what did you give? What did you give? We actually track it and have it on a sheet and know exactly what everybody's giving, what they're not giving, why they're giving that, what they might be trading, yada yada. Having those conversations so that that's not being used against them at the table. I've made that very clear. I have some necessary small school districts too that are not getting new funding, that are higher revenue already. And I had one district in particular that was looking at giving a larger raise, and I went out and met with their board and met with that superintendent first and didn't get too far. Went out and met with the board, and he tried to explain to me, not really getting any new money, but the pressures that are on him because other folks, locally. In the old world, we would all get very similar COLAs. So you could have conversations. If you're given 2%, you're given 2%. Seem fair. It's not like that anymore. Everybody's different. And so having to really educate folks and have them understand that piece. And then that's gone really well. In regards to internet access, when I was a district superintendent, probably even prior to the internet at some point, we worked with Charter Cable to bring cable into our school, and they did it for free. And then we worked, when the internet came, we kind of worked with that same piece too. So as a county office, we have the high-speed network, and so everybody every district comes through us. And so we've worked with, we have some pretty rural areas that go pretty far out. So we've worked with another company called Frontier, and we're using our schools as our base. And then we're trying to give, like in Fall River and Bernie, really small little area, K-12 district, parents are coming through them. And they're, for that network, they already have it. So the parents already have free access. That's a very poor community, a little migrant community also too. So we're just trying to expand that, playing around with that locally, and we're trying to ask our local partners to provide it for free.
Thank you.